Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight for our Village of Alsip committee meeting. Today is Monday, February 24th, 2020. We'll call this meeting order at 7:32 p.m. Can you call the roll, please?
Yes, please, before I call roll, if all of the members of the audience would please silence their cell phones, we'd appreciate it. Trustee Delzell.
Here.
Trustee Zielinski.
Here.
Trustee Juarez. Here. Trustee McLawhorn.
Here.
Trustee Murphy.
Here.
Trustee Navas-Barza. Here. Mayor Ryan.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Please join us for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Again, great crowd this evening. Obviously, I know the police department's here because, Chief, we're still having a problem with those, the toilets downstairs don't work in the locker room, right? And everybody come out. We'll get those fixed, all right? They don't work in the lockup, they don't work in the locker room. And I guess we just got 2 bids, we need 3 per ordinance, so we're working on it. We'll get it done as soon as possible and stuff then, too. And I'm serious. So, no, we're here tonight to celebrate a couple of promotions. And I wanted to give a quick overview. I met with the chief earlier, and I'd like to make a short statement. First, we're going to acknowledge Val Emick. Val Emick has given 18 years of dedicated service to the residents of Alsip. She started in the patrol division in 2002. She became an evidence technician in 2005, a certified juvenile officer in 2006, a traffic accident investigator since 2006 is one of the things she does now. She was promoted to the rank of sergeant in 2007. She has been an evidence custodian for the department from 2008 to the present. She's also a certified crisis intervention team officer and supervisor of the Alsip Crisis Intervention Team, a member of the Illinois Association of Property and Evidence Managers from 2018 to present. She recently became a certified ALICE instructor for active shooting incidents. She is currently developing and organizing policies and procedures for the department's law enforcement accreditation program. So again, tonight, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to congratulate Sergeant Emick on her promotion to the rank of lieutenant, and certainly congratulations to Chief Miller and your command staff for qualifying and recommending this promotion. So thank you for your service to our community, Val. If you would, please come up. We'll swear you in.
That way your right hand is in front of your face. Raise your right hand, please. I, Valerie Emick.
I, Valerie Emick,
Do solemnly swear
that
that I will support the Constitution of the United States,
I will support the Constitution of the United States,
the Constitution of the State of Illinois,
the Constitution of the State of Illinois,
and the municipal ordinances
and the municipal ordinances
of the Village of Alsip,
of the Village of Alsip,
that I will faithfully discharge
that I will faithfully discharge
the duties of the office of
the duties of the office of
Lieutenant according to the best of my ability.
Lieutenant to the best of my ability.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Congratulations, sir.
Congratulations.
Very nice. Congratulations again, Val, and good luck. Next on our agenda, we had, we're going to promote, I'm proud to help promote the promotion of Mike DeLear. Mike's going to be promoted from detective to the position of sergeant. Mike DeLear was sworn in as an officer in May 1999. Mike became a detective and juvenile officer in 2002. Throughout his 18-year career as a detective, he has worked numerous crimes, including crimes against persons, financial crimes, homicides, exploitation of elderly, and identity thefts. Mike has been an investigator and supervisor for the South Suburban Major Crimes Task Force. He has been on the advisory board of the Children's Advocacy Center and is a member of the CAIR, that's C-A-I-R, otherwise known as the Child Abuse and Investigative Resource Team, which assists detectives throughout the Cook County's 5th District on child sexual assault cases. Mike also maintained the sex offender and violent offender against youth registrations and has been a liaison for the Department of Children and Family Services. Mike has been an instructor with NEMERT, teaching classes which include case review and sexual assault investigations. Again, NEMERT stands for the Northeast Multi-Regional Training, which is one of 14 mobile teams in the area, and it's part of what they call the ASSIST program. So, again, I wish to congratulate Detective Mike DeLear on his promotion to the rank of sergeant, and thank the Police and Fire Commission for overseeing the testing procedure, which makes this promotion fair and possible. Again, thank you for your service to our community. Mike, please step up. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce, this is Vince Cullen and Kevin O'Connell. This is the Police and Fire Commission. Here, if you would please, so we can record, sir.
Mike, if you would repeat after me. I, Mike DeLear,
I, Mike DeLear,
do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States,
do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States,
the Constitution of the State of Illinois,
the Constitution of the State of Illinois,
and the municipal ordinances of the Village of Alsip,
and the municipal ordinances of the Village of Alsip,
that I will faithfully discharge the duties of the office
that I will faithfully discharge the duties of the office
of Sergeant according to the best of my ability.
of Sergeant according to the best of my ability.
Congratulations, Sergeant.
Make him bleed.
Congratulations.
Congrats, Mike.
Trustees, I'd like to just take a 5-minute recess so we can do a couple of photos with everyone and their families, and we'll continue the meeting after that, okay? Thank you.
Your candy comes in handy. Thank you. From last time.
Thanks.
It's for me. Thank you.
It's not on water.
Okay, last folder.
I just have to sign these.
It's not on water.
Yeah, I give it to you, and then we should go to somebody in finance. I'll take it.
Officers, do we have?
Is that right?
I know Catalina's chairman of water.
But I'm not on finance either.
And on finance, so I will take it. No, I'm already in the middle of a pile, so I'm just going to the bottom.
It's just the last one. There's just one.
Oh, there's only one?
Yeah, and it's on the
Last
bottom.
one.
No, okay.
Cleared out that room, huh?
You mean they weren't here for us? It's so funny if you had a group of kids come in and smell like weed.
Reassemble
Were you at that meeting?
the garbage.
Kids come in, but they smell like weed.
No.
No, you guys can do it any way you want. We have a roaming mic, we have a mic there. I think the system's going to be able to work. I'm just going to test it.
Right, and after that fiasco, why would we even...
Like it works.
The city rates are going sky high. This is an alternative.
Probably don't even need this computery stuff. You can sit up here.
You too. Thanks, man. Yeah. Where you going? Okay.
If it was a board meeting, there would be.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Kevin.
See you, Kev.
Bye.
Good seeing you.
Good night.
Okay, I'm going to call this meeting back to order at 7:45. We'll finish with our reports, and we've got a presentation here as well. Just to finish my report, we did the promotions of the two officers. Also, I had we had a request. Number 3 was a request to consider a second amendment to the lease agreement with Shout Outdoor Media regarding the electronic billboard to be placed on village property. Basically, Danny, I don't have my note right in front of me, but I believe that was just to extend when they can start construction. That was the amendment.
They were originally given an additional year based on the fact that we had to clear up some property tax issues. And once those were cleared up, we gave them a year to complete construction. Well, now the next issue that's cropped up is the painting of the south water tower is going to be, completed during their time frame of construction. So they're going to have to negotiate, access to the site in order to complete the work. And so they're just asking for some flexibility on that as well, just because we're removing antennas off of the water tower for T-Mobile and Sprint to be on a temporary pole. So a lot of activity down there. They just want to make sure they can get in and do complete their work, without exceeding the time frame that they currently had.
Okay. And I apologize, Mr. Grachek, you and I were just talking. I did have some notes on my sheet, Stan, when we were talking to the back of the room, I forgot. I thought we were looking at a variance, but we were talking about extending the time, as Dan just says, when they can start construction. That's what the amendment's about.
Yeah. And the variance is also part of that, the request for a variance for the additional 10 feet of height.
That's what I was telling Stan. They're looking for 10 feet higher than normal.
Correct. So those are the two factors, leading to their request. There was a delay in getting them on the schedule for the variance hearing.
Okay. No, that's fine. So that's what's, I'll have that, trustees, on the agenda next week, asking to approve the extension that you're speaking of, Dan. And as far as height goes, is that determined by planning and zoning yet, or that's a whole different issue?
Currently, the ordinance, I believe, is 65 feet. They're asking for an additional 10 feet at 75 feet.
Do they need to come back to planning and
That's why
zoning for that?
They're looking for, the planning and zoning hearing for the variance.
Okay.
and they're on the schedule for that, but they were delayed in getting on the schedule.
Gotcha, okay. So Stan, you've got that scheduled too, right? Okay. Next Wednesday, 7:30? Okay. And then I had number 4 was a request to attend Lobby Day for myself at the Illinois Capitol in Springfield on April 29th. This will include a 2-night hotel stay with special room rates actually being reserved through the Southwest Conference of Mayors. It's a good event. Last year was the first year that I went, and had an opportunity to meet with a lot of our legislators, understand some of the issues that the state is faced with as well as ours, and see if we can get some assistance. I actually did see Aaron, I saw you down out there last year too. Robinson Engineering was there last year too, so it was some pretty good meetings that we had, and it helps too. Where South Suburban, I was working with both groups last year. I actually went down and with a block rooms with South Suburban mayors and managers, but I actually had dinner with the Southwest Conference guys. So it's good to work with both organizations, and they're familiar with everybody too. As I mentioned, and I'm not fooling around, we are working on that ejector pump issue at the police station. We did get 2 bids, and per ordinance we need 3, because we're looking at, Roger, you got 2 bids at like $24,000 on the pump, but then we need some, maybe $4,000 worth of electrical work.
$4,000 to $5,000 worth of electrical work. What I would ask tonight is...
Roger, I'm sorry, could you step up to a microphone? Thank you.
That is correct. Roughly $23,000 to $24,000, and then what I would also look for is roughly $4,000 to $5,000 for electrical to run new electric to these new pumps. What I would ask is for consensus this evening. This way, as soon as I do have that third proposal to go ahead and get it ordered, they're saying it's 4 to 5 weeks out. I'm going to push it as fast as I can. But I would like to get this ordered as soon as we get it in. Right now...
I'll certainly share that information with the board once we get it, but right now we don't have any toilets in the men's and women's locker room on the basement level, as well as all the jail cells have individual toilets. None of those work right now. Everything has to be done on the first floor. And again, this equipment's from like the 70s, right?
It was actually installed in '76, and then they did a refurbishing in 1999.
So we actually have to upgrade the service at the same time with the electric and so forth, because it's all outdated equipment. And like anything else, we're looking at some old infrastructure on this thing yet too. So
the 3 bids required on an emergency. It seems like this is.
You know, Trustee, I was going to go. We got 2 bids from trusted plumbing sources that we use here in the village, but
right.
Ordinance said 3, and I didn't want to challenge it. I know we need something done right away, but we do have a source. We're going to get one more bid, but as soon as we get it, if we know we're paying a fair number, and that's what we want to execute it right away then too.
Right.
Okay. I actually keep that on my desk all the time. I got the rules on what everybody's allowed to spend and all that kind of thing, so.
Because my understanding on an emergency was.
Yeah, I don't have it in front of me, but I think that
Right.
you can get it done.
Right.
Work now, ask questions later.
You know what, tomorrow, we'll meet tomorrow morning first thing, 8:30, we'll talk about it tomorrow morning. And actually, I'm downtown
Do we want to get a consensus not to exceed 30,000?
I would agree with that. Would the board be okay that we're not going to exceed this number? Because we're at 24 plus 4 right now, so we're not going to exceed 30?
Okay.
Sure.
Yep.
Yes. Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. And you know what, I've got court tomorrow for Village Matter, but as soon as I get back, we'll talk about that, okay?
Sounds good.
Okay. And I also had some, I didn't make it to the agenda, but I am going to request, well, we can talk about it right now too, is a request for approval of a 6B renewal for a property located at 11600 South Central and 5750 West 118th Street. These are both owned by the same property group. This is Berry Plastics, and they're currently on a 6B, and it's going to be expiring soon. I forgot the date on that, but I know it's expiring soon, but they wanted to lay the groundwork for a possible renewal. And, it wouldn't be fair to share the numbers out loud. It is public information, but I think it's, I will certainly get in a I'll get data to all of the trustees to share those numbers and so forth then too, as far as what the value of that is, as far as the 6B renewal.
Isn't that something normally the attorney would sit there and review and make the recommendation of?
He and I have been talking, and he actually said too, the value of that property, and they're paying a substantial property tax on that, and I confirmed with Mr. Early, with our building commissioner, that only half that building is even occupied. And, you know, the danger in, it's nice to use the 6Bs, you know, it's unfortunate, but you need those, you have to have a tool to bring business in, and the 6Bs really help us do that. At the same time, we gave 12 years of relief, and you hate to think that you need to go into an extension, but you've learned to live with that umbrella of how much money came in through that property tax revenue. The problem is that if for any reason, when you take sizable properties like this one, this is probably over 500,000 square feet of building, if for any reason, especially when they're only half occupied, if they leave, that means everybody picks up their part. You know what I mean? Now, the homeowners, the businesses, everybody picks up that money and that kind of thing then too. So it's unfortunate, but you got to use these tools. I don't like it. I really don't. I mean, we've only done a couple of renewals in the town since I've been on the board anyway. We've only done a couple. And but again, this is where we qualify. This is why I want to bring it to the board and remind everybody what's at stake. You know, because I can tell you, these are sizable. I mean, it's public knowledge. I didn't want to share it. These are all being filmed. We're on camera right now, so it is public knowledge. You can look them up if it's of any interest to you. But I will share these numbers with the board this week. But I think these are sizable numbers. If we lose this particular tenant, everyone is going to pick up a sizable amount of money for that too. So I think it would be in our best interest to make it happen. I think we've learned to live with the property tax that's come in, and we're only using 17% of that, 17.8%, but we've learned to make do. And I think this will really have an impact on parks and schools and everybody else and stuff then too. So I will get some dollar data to everybody then too during the week. And that's all I had for the evening. Clerk's report.
Thank you, Mayor Ryan. Presentation of the January 2020 IDOT motor fuel tax allotment in the amount of $59,962.06. That is all, Mayor Ryan.
Thank you. Public forum. Did anyone in the audience wish to address the board tonight? Nobody? We'll go to standing committee reports. Finance Committee, Trustee McGlawhorn.
Next week, I will have the usual list of payroll and accounts payable for approval. And I also believe next week at 6:30, we will finish up the remaining departments in terms of the budget review.
Okay. Thank you. Fire Committee, Trustee Murphy.
I have request to hire 2 firefighter paramedics to replace 2 current personnel scheduled for retirement this year, 2020. The chief is not here tonight, so I'll be speaking to this. The request, he's requesting a consensus vote to begin processing 2 firefighter paramedics to replace the retiring firefighter paramedics during this upcoming May and June. The chief is asking to begin the process now since there are only 11 people left on the current list, and he went through 6 people the last time during the last replacement hire. There is an upcoming test that may need to be moved up. If he exhausts this list, the chief will discuss the dates, the start dates at the committee meeting on March 9th. So essentially, he's looking for a consensus to go ahead with the hiring process. This would be full-time at the current rate. It is budgeted for, and it is within budget. And as we know, we have minimal manning. So this would kind of help him along to get this kind of a jump start on this.
I spoke to Trustee Murphy earlier today, and I can appreciate the chief's urgency to look at a consensus to hire 2, because he has mentioned to the board when he presented his budget recently that he's going to have 2 firemen retiring this year. I'm going to say that they're not going to be leaving until like June 1st, typically. To
Do we actually have submitted retirement, or is this
I believe so.
just...
Actually,
in
Vince
anticipation?
Collins here, you're with the Police and Fire Commission. They did put in, Vince? Okay. So I don't know that, I mean, it's up to the board. If you feel it's necessary to give a consensus, he can start the process of screening to see if there's any personnel available. Otherwise, we can certainly put this on the agenda next week as a formal approval for the same action.
I'd like to have more information. I mean,
Yep.
the existing list, we have X number of people who are on that list and eligible. When does the list expire? If these retirements are truly going to take effect, June 1st, both of them, one of them, some of them?
Then we
I
don't
know
need a
what the-
consensus
yeah.
in February,
Right. So, I mean, it seems like there's a lot of unanswered things here.
Well, that's what I explained to the and obviously, trustees just reiterating what the chief asked them to, but I kind of said the same thing. I'd like to have the chief speak to it a little bit more and put that on the agenda for more discussion next week and stuff then, too.
Or on March 9th, at the next committee meeting.
Well, I mean, we can put it on there for
even at the
a
board
vote
meeting.
as long
Yeah.
as, I don't know if everyone else is satisfied with what's been presented thus far.
But, no, we can put it on the board meeting for next week and have a discussion and see if the board wants to move on that next week. But I think that the additional verbiage from the chief would be supportive and to make that decision, that's all. Because I don't have anything in writing to say when, as you said, trustee, what date each gentleman's leaving and stuff then, or person, I should say, is leaving.
Right, and how long it takes to train them up, and I know that in the past, we've moved to have people brought in so that there wouldn't be a suffering of the manpower, and I get it, and it's prudent, but I'd like to see all those numbers so that
Right.
we can see how the pieces of the puzzles fall in.
Exactly. In the past, we have gotten an actual spreadsheet with the calculations of what the cost is going to be for the expected hiring date of these individuals, the amount of training relative to the amount of overlap.
Well, one thing I
And
think is...
at this
oh,
point
go
in
ahead.
time, I would just finish up. I mean, this would not be in the budget for this year because this would be 2 extra heads above and beyond, since the gentlemen or the employees are not retiring until the next fiscal year. Whatever expense we incur this year is out of budget.
And I would still, like I say, I would agree with the chief with, training 2 personnel at the same time will save us money too. So we're not going to take on 1 person and a month or 2 later take on another, and it'll just create more overtime. And I want to keep the overtime down as much as we can.
And the dollar amount that shows on the request to hire form doesn't make sense. He's got an hourly dollar amount here that seems...
Is that the overtime rate that he
No,
put
it's
in?
a request to hire form, and it shows what the non-exempt salary would be.
See if it's here too.
Boy, I have no idea.
Then I would ask Trustee Murphy if you put that on the agenda for next week for, as you just read, with the request to hire. And, I think, I know the chief was off today, he had a vacation day. I'm not sure if it's tomorrow too, but I'll get a note, or if you want to get a note back to him, let's explain that we're looking for a little more dialogue next week to follow.
So would it be, he's going to speak to it,
Yeah.
and then we would vote on it?
Yeah.
Or pull it,
Exactly, where he's going to speak
based
to
on
it
his
first.
discussion?
Exactly.
Okay,
Yeah,
sure.
just some more information for the board, that's all.
Great. And that's all I have,
Thanks,
sir.
trustee. I was saying, anything else? Okay. Police and traffic safety, trustee Dalzell.
No report, Mayor.
All right. Public work and boat launch, trustee Juarez.
No report.
All right. I know Mike Frater's not here tonight. We got to talk with him. I know he wanted, we're about a month out from opening up the boat launch again, too. It's funny how quick the off-season goes and stuff, too. But April 1, smelt day,
Probably not worried about the boat launch as much as he's worried about rock salt tonight.
That's true, too. Yeah.
Weather.
Probably all getting a nap right now. Next is the water and sewer report. Trustee Nava Esparza.
Thank you. The first item I have is a presentation by Southland Water Agency regarding water supply. So I'll open the floor to you.
John, if you would, if you want to introduce yourselves, and I will preempt this just to let everybody know that a couple weeks ago, Kent Olivan and I participated in a meeting, and we basically saw the same presentation. Aaron Fundich is here from Robinson Engineering, and he said he's abbreviated that somewhat, and I appreciate that, but this was a good meeting. It's similar to what Aaron presented to. Aaron, you were here about a year or so ago, right?
It was 2 years ago.
Was it 2 years now? Okay. And again, I've spoke to Aaron about this in defense of our opinion. We got involved, the village, I should say, got involved in an alternative water supply years ago, and it didn't shake out well. This is a new venture that Aaron can explain much better with new partners and whatnot. And it's a good presentation. So thank you. Aaron, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. In fact, I'm going to have this start with Jay Weinsma. Jay, I'm going to introduce Jay. He is the village administrator for the village of South Holland, and he's also the executive committee chairman for the Southland Water Agency, which is what we're here to speak with you this evening about. So I'm going to let Jay kind of lead off the presentation, and then we'll flip-flop a little later. Okay?
Sure.
Well, good evening, everyone. It's good to be here with you. I'm going to try to provide as much information as possible so you guys can make informed decisions and yet get through it in a very timely manner, just to be respectful of your time. But just as a little bit of where the SWA is today, it is now a legally registered agency with the state of Illinois. We are light years ahead of where the previous JAWA was. We already have an agreement for a Lake Michigan access site. We actually have a signed pre-development agreement for the financing and the building of everything that's on the Indiana side. So we're going to get into all these details, but just to give you this broad overview first, we have preliminary agreement for the route that the pipe would actually take from Lake Michigan to Illinois, and we haven't identified an available site for the water treatment plant. So an incredible amount of work has been accomplished over the last few years, and we presented all of this to most of the Southland mayors and managers 2 weeks?
February 4th.
The 4th of February. So this is a follow-up. So here's what the Southland Water Agency is essentially going to be able to provide. The whole idea of the SWA is that this is for us. This is for us, the Southland. This is about us controlling our own destiny. This is about us no longer being beholden to the city of Chicago and all of their rate increases, which we'll talk more about later, which have been on an average of 6% a year over the last 35 years. Rates have tripled in the last 12 years. So this is about getting control of water for us for the next 100 years. So what we're going to be able to provide, because of the way we structured this, is that on day one, all of the member communities are going to have water rates that are at least 3% less than whatever their contract is at that time for their supplier. Now, some may be more than that, but we are guaranteeing that everyone's rates are going to be at least 3% less. We're also guaranteeing that there will be absolutely no rate increase for the first 10 years. Aaron's going to get into a little bit about how we can make these kinds of guarantees, but there will be no rate increases for the first 10 years, and all of these things are provided for in the water supply contracts. Beyond that 10-year period, from years 11 to 50, because these are 50-year water supply contracts, there would never be a rate increase that's more than 2% annually. So the communities will know for the next 50 years exactly, what the outside is in terms of water rates. And then we'll get into, in a minute, a little bit the discounts for early adopters. We are essentially trying to get this plane off the ground. And so we're going to talk about the incentives that have been built in to get people on board early, which will do a whole series of things for us, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So the agency itself, I mentioned was organized in May. The IGA that formed it was between South Holland, East Hazelcrest, and Thornton. So the mayors of those three communities make up the board. The executive committee is the managers of those three communities, myself, Pat Lazuka from East Hazel Crest, and Doug Beckman from Thornton. Robinson Engineering has been appointed as the engineer of record, and Ice Miller is the attorney. So here's what we're doing in a very clear, we want to provide a sustainable, high-quality, cost-effective supply of Lake Michigan water for us, for the Southland, in a very fair and transparent manner. So our key values are transparency and rate predictability. So this is a not-for-profit deal. This is just for us, for the Southland. So there's nobody with a profit motive. There's nobody who's making any money off of this. This is simply for us, the communities of the Southland. So to that end, there's complete transparency, completely audited financials, and everybody can see where every dime is spent. And then, as I mentioned before, you have to know what the rates are going to be for the entire term of the contract, something that none of us could ever get. In the Village of South Holland, we are direct customers of the City of Chicago, and I've been forced in my role and with our board to pass on these crazy rate hikes to our residents for a long time, and really enough is enough. I mentioned the 6% annual increase. That's over the last 35 years. Back in 2006, it was only $1.33 per 1,000 gallons. Today, it's $3.98. So there's...
It may get bumped again June 1st.
We anticipate, right. 2007 and 9, and then 12 and 15, those were some of the years where they had the double-digit increases. So anyway, the current Southland average is $4.57 per 1,000. So what are we doing? What is the SWA building? This is a completely new system. So right from Lake Michigan and Gary, Indiana, to the south suburbs. Completely new intake, pump station, water transmission lines, everything new. Completely independent, again, just for the purposes of serving us in the Southland. The water rates are not dependent on anybody else. They're not going to be tied to what anyone else does. So, for instance, Hammond has recently tied their water rates to being 88% of whatever Chicago's water rates are. That's not the case here. The water rates are going to be set by just what does it cost to operate the system. And the system is not, a major complex system like where the City of Chicago operates, a system that serves their entire city and these distribution lines to us, but really they're funding all their own inner city system on the backs of all of us in the Southland. We're paying for their system. So that's not the case here. It's going to be completely independent. Water rates that are less than what your current supplier is, we're going to finance the improvements over 40 years. So when you get to the 41st year, the rates are going to be less than a third of what Chicago and Hammond are. So most of us are not going to be here anymore. We will probably not be holding these roles, but it's a legacy thing. It matters for the Southland. So in 40 years, the rate will be less than the year one rate. So a huge chunk of what the rate will be for the next 40 years is going to be the financing of that system. Once the system has been paid off, because there's no profit motive, the rates will just plummet. And so the year 41 rate will be less than the year one rate. Obviously, for all of us trying to do economic development, we need a reliable source of water. We need it to be cost effective. And when you, as a community, you have these rates that you're paying now to your supplier, and then this is what you're charging your residents. And in between there, you're using that rate difference to operate your water system, right? You got to fix your water main breaks and all that kind of stuff. So if you then take that same scenario, but now your rates are down here,
Your cost is down.
your cost is down here, you've got this much bigger gap. And so you have a built-in source of funds to actually do a much better job of maintaining your own water system. Things that all of us in municipal government have a very difficult time funding. So you can also choose to lower the rates to your residents if you can afford to do that. But the ability to have a built-in source of funds simply by lowering what your costs are is staggering. I know in South Holland we've got millions and millions of dollars worth of underground water lines that need to be replaced and repaired, and you just can't afford to do it. This is actually going to build in a source of funds for that for all of the Southland communities. Three quick things I want to just mention, just kind of in passing. One is the partnership with Joliet. Joliet is on an aquifer system. As you probably know, they've got about 10 years of water supply, and then they have to do something. Aaron's going to talk a little bit about where Joliet is at in that process, but that's one of the things that we're working diligently on, is to partner with Joliet to be a customer of the system. Another option that has the potential to lower costs for some of the upfront expenses for the Southland Water Agency is for us to acquire essentially what is the spine of the Harvey system. We don't need to. It's not critical to what we're doing. If we do, they're already connected to a handful of communities because they sell water to other communities. So if we were able to purchase from them, and we're in negotiations with them on it, discussions with them, it would just lower the infrastructure costs up front. And then lastly, WIFIA funding. Aaron's going to get into that, but it's a funding source through the federal government that has got enormous advantages for massive water infrastructure projects like this. So we would love to land all three of those, or any one or two of the three, but regardless of any of them, we're moving forward.
Jay, can you go back to Harvey? Where does Harvey stand in this again?
Where do they stand on the SWA?
What did DML mean again, anyway?
It's their downstream municipal line. It's basically the spine of their system that serves their other customers, and they sell to...
They sell to 5 or 6 other communities.
But they're buying directly from Chicago.
They buy directly from Chicago, and they wheel water to Homewood, Flossmoor, Hazelcrest, Posen, Dixmoor, East Hazelcrest. And they've got a existing and right now, over the last couple of years, because of their financial woes, which I think some folks here would be familiar with from years ago, their waters fund was put into receivership. They've been in a lawsuit with the city of Chicago for a number of years. It's given us the opportunity to at least consider the idea of if we could purchase the primary infrastructure, which would be the pump station, the supply line from Chicago, the storage reservoirs. If those could be purchased, the idea that maybe it would be less expensive in the long run for the agency to do that than to build all new.
So they wouldn't be managing that, they would be just a
No,
customer?
it would have to be owned and managed by the agency. We wouldn't let Harvey manage it, no.
Okay. That's all. That's where I was going with that, that's all.
Good question. I think, Aaron, you're going to...
Sure, I can take it from here, Jay, thanks. The one thing to keep in mind is that, in fact, I'm vertically challenged, so I'm not going to try to use this one, but I'll use this one here. The initial water rates, and really to make all of this work for all the communities, the whole thing in the south suburbs is how do we save money on this? And in order to really make that work, we know it's going to save hundreds of millions of dollars collectively for the long run over the life of the infrastructure. But it's very important to make it easier for all the folks that are, directly responsible to the constituents that we're at or below your current cost on day one. We've got to be able to make it work that way. And so while that's important, even that is a relatively small part of the equation, because it is that long-term cost over the 75-year lifetime of the infrastructure that's really significant. And Jay touched on this earlier. We're going to look to finance this over 40 years. When that happens, we're going to match, or we're going to be below the current supply rates from day one. But 75 to 80% of that is going to be fixed debt for 40 years. So over time, CPI is going to happen to everybody. What's happening today is whether a supplier is Chicago or Oak Lawn or Harvey or Hammond or Chicago Heights, there's lots of different suburbs that have different suppliers in the Southland. And they all pay different rates, and they all are getting charged CPI on the full, say, $4 that Chicago charges. So 2% on that every year is 8 cents. But with a brand new system, number one, your O&M costs are going to be significantly lower because it's going to be a brand new system. Number two, the entire rate is still going to be very close to that same $4, let's say. But the CPI factor for costs that really go up over time, personnel costs, electricity costs, chemical costs to treat the water, things like that's going to still go up, but that's only $1 out of the 4. So for 2% only to be applied to $1 instead of $4 over a long period of time, it creates an unbelievable amount of savings over time. So that's why Jay had mentioned earlier, after our financing period is over, our rate will drop at least $3 or $4 per 1,000 gallons right then and there because that financing would be paid off. And we've got this modeled over a long period of time. And if you bear with me, this graph is in the packets that I handed out to you. But what this reflects, you can see the 398 on the lower left part of the screen. That's where we are today in 2020. That's what Chicago's wholesale rate is today, and that's what Alsip pays to buy the water. Now, over time, you can see the black part of the graph. The top of that curve is Chicago going up at 2% on annual each year for the next 75 years. That's Chicago 2%. The light blue curve is Chicago 2.5%, and the more pronounced blue is at 3%. Now, remember what Jay mentioned earlier. The last 35 years, they've averaged 6%. That doesn't fit on the screen. So we're being very conservative in terms of the money that we think we're going to save over time. We believe right now, depending on a lot of factors, that we're going to really get a better handle on this current calendar year, that it's going to take 6 to 7 years to go through the entire design, permitting, land acquisition, construction, testing process. So we're estimating that, after folks decide whether they're in or not in the coming year, 6 years from there is probably the best case scenario when the water would actually flow. But we're going to model this at 7 years after that to be a little more conservative. So in 2028, if Chicago's rate goes up just 2% per year, they'll be at 398 will be 476. A few years later, in 2035, that'll jump to 546. And then when you get 30, 40 years out there, you can see those numbers. At 40 years later, in 2027, it'll be at 1030. My eyes aren't the best. And then 1050 in the following year in 2068, all the way up to $20. And that, again, this is at 2%. If we were at 3% annual Chicago increases, you can see further out there that those numbers get way up to $43 instead of $20. It's just the time value of money. It's very powerful over a long period of time. In 2028, the current supplier average amongst the south suburban communities will be 546. So that when we've been looking at an average rate for the south suburbs, that's what we've been targeting as we model this project. And that project really consists of, if there's a minimum of 20 million gallons per day in the south suburbs that join the agency, it will be cost effective in order to proceed. We would not want to proceed with less than 20 million gallons a day because it's going to be really hard to be lower on day one. But we are confident that we're going to get there. We've already had, this is the second of 5 of these individual presentations that we've had since we made the big presentation 3 weeks ago. This is going to be modeled. Those rates that you see there in red are what the agency rates would be based on a baseline project of costing $600 million, financed for 40 years. And that's also assuming that we get just Joliet to join us. And I'm going to get into a little bit more of that later. But that's the model that we're basing this analysis on right now. Talked about the south suburban communities. And these are all the communities that in one form or another have exhibited some level of interest in what can we do about the water rates of our current suppliers. I'm not going to get into all the details of who supplies who, but I mentioned that of all those towns, there's 5 different suppliers, there's 5 different rate structures, and there's 5 different levels of unpredictability. And that's been going on for quite some time. All told, those communities that you see total up about 53 million gallons per day on an average allocation. So, $600 million, huge investment, and I'm not trying to minimize that at all. Our debt model for that, for a 40-year debt profile, would be $28 million a year to pay on the debt service. Big number, without a doubt. But to put that into perspective, and if you look at that 2028 average water rate that we talked about for all those communities, being 546, they're paying their current suppliers $40 million a year on just 20 million gallons a day. That's what 20 million gallons a day costs at 546. It's 40 million a year. So the concept of being able to support the debt service is really a relatively easy thing to do when you really realize how much money goes out the door to pay for to buy the water. The current wholesale prices range all over the place. They range over 100%. The lowest ones are about $3.50 right now. That's 88% of what Chicago charges. Some of those towns in the pink pay that to Hammond. Others are charged over $7 per thousand at the current time. And none of them, again, have this predictability portion that we're trying to really get to. The big question that a lot of communities have, and I think rightfully so based on history, is how long is our current supplier just going to charge CPI? You know, I think everyone's well aware that Chicago's financial profile is not necessarily the greatest on a lot of different levels. That means that's a big risk going forward. Hammond's is not much better, is my understanding. And if they're already going to be tied to 88% of what Chicago does, it's probably not, it doesn't matter that much for the communities that get their water from Hammond. And I was in the city council meeting in Joliet back in January when they ultimately voted that they're going to build a new system coming this way for their next water supply. And one of the aldermen there asked a really prescient question. He said, what if, because of those debt profiles, what's to stop Chicago from selling the water system just like they sold the parking meters? And believe it or not, I mean, there was a fair amount of discussion at the Joliet meeting about that, and I thought about it, and I remembered something from a couple years ago. There was actually a newspaper article in the Sun-Times in April of 2018, less than 2 years ago, that when Rahm Emanuel was mayor, they did entertain an offer from Goldman Sachs to sell the water system to them. They didn't ultimately come to terms, or they didn't take it, but it was on the table as recently as 2015. So when you think about things in those terms, and I included a copy of that article in your packets that I handed out this evening, it is something that is a risk in the long run for all the suburban communities, not just the south suburbs, but DuPage County, Lake County, whoever else is getting water from Chicago. So we'll see what happens with that going forward. But in terms of where we are as the agency, Jay touched on the fact we have a signed contract. We have a group in Northwest Indiana that owns the property, or owns a piece of property adjacent to Lake Michigan. We've developed a 99-year lease agreement with them to be able to build our pump station, be able to put an intake in the lake off of that line. If any of you are familiar with where the Majestic Star Casino is in Gary, that's roughly where the property is. I'm going to show you a little video that kind of walks you through that. But there's a non-disclosure agreement on all of the detailed terms of it. I can say that I can report that who the managing partner of that arrangement is, who's the CEO of Luke Oil in Northwest Indiana. The terms are far more advantageous than what our group had been trying to negotiate with Hammond for a couple of years, and my understanding from what the prior group had been trying to negotiate with Hammond for a long period of time. I know that the terms that we've got are far better. As Jay alluded to, this group will finance and build the first $300 million of this project to bring the project to the state line, at which point the agency, at a predetermined price, will purchase the infrastructure, and most of it will lie in easements and so forth, but the agency will always own the infrastructure. The agency also has executed a contract with Robinson as well as a couple of our engineering partners to put together an entire funding application and a facilities planning report that we do plan to submit to the U.S. EPA this summer as our first step in obtaining WIFIA funding. The other thing that the Board of Directors did is to approve a model water supply contract. Jay touched on this 50-year contract. These are all things that are done and are ready to be considered by anyone that's interested in getting involved. Joliet. We've actually had partnership discussions with Joliet for close to 4 years now. When the news first came out of how severe their aquifer system is, and we knew that they were going to be going through this process of determining where they were going to get their water, we brought them this option 3 years ago. And after they studied 14 different water supply options, from Lake Michigan water to the Kankakee River to the Illinois River to the Fox River, Joliet decided, first of all, on Lake Michigan water, but of the multiple Lake Michigan options they looked at, whether it was DuPage Water Commission or Chicago or Illinois American, their environmental commission recommended overwhelmingly to build a new system to Northwest Indiana. So we know that that's what Joliet's involved in at this current time. We don't have a signed agreement with Joliet at this time, but we are meeting with them regularly, and we're hopeful that before the year is out, we will have some type of an agreement with Joliet. What would that look like? I showed you that map of communities. Joliet by itself currently uses 19 million gallons a day, and because they've got a lot of future growth, that number will be 24 MGD by 2050. So it's a significant community. Many other communities that surround Joliet are on that same deep aquifer and may also be looking to jump on the Lake Michigan water system. They're following Joliet's lead. Joliet is in the process right now. Even just last week, they made a big presentation to the Will County Governmental League as they're going to be looking to potentially form a water agency of their own in that region to look at how they're going to best and most cost-effectively bring Lake Michigan water to southwest Will County. What we have proposed, and we submitted this to them last August as they were finishing the study of their options. What this basically shows is that all the part in black, which basically it's a schematic that brings the system from Lake Michigan, the concept would be we build a treatment plant in the south suburbs to serve the south suburbs, but we bypass that plant, keep running raw water to Joliet. Was it working? Okay. I wasn't sure how the pointer worked. But basically, to bypass our plant, keep running raw water to the Will County line, where Joliet could purchase just the raw water from the agency, take it to Joliet, build their own treatment plant that they would manage, and sell the water to Joliet as well as whichever other communities that would be interested in joining with Joliet. That's the concept. There's, again, quite a ways to go to finalize that concept, but they've had this since the last 6 months or so. As far as our project team, Robinson is not going to do this. Those of you who are familiar with Robinson, this is not something that we could handle or ever would try to handle all by ourselves. We have partnered with a couple of firms that are nationwide, international firms. Lockwood, Andrews, and Newman are headquartered in Houston. They've got an office in Oak Brook. They would be responsible for developing the intake into the lake as well as the raw water pump station facilities. Stanley Consultants would design the water treatment facility, and Robinson would pretty much be involved with most of the other aspects of the water lines and the pump stations. What does this look like? Let's see if this will work. No, it didn't go. Should we show that video, or are we going too long in the tooth here? Let's see if we can...
Can we just go straight to the...
Yeah, I might just... Yeah, let me do that. I'm going to show you a quick video of what the route is that's planned. It's SWA Alsip, to the right. Oh, yeah, that's it, you're right. You're essentially moving south right now toward the Borman Expressway, and we'll be crossing there in just a second here. Now turning west along the NIPSCO right-of-way, which is the Northwest Indiana equivalent of ComEd. No, going west. The group in Indiana would be responsible to construct this entire route and deliver it at the state line, which we're coming up to here shortly. And as Jay had mentioned, we had identified a site that we believe will work very well for our water treatment facility. This is here. We're right at the state line right now, and those of you that might be familiar with Lansing Country Club, that's this site, which has been for sale for about 3 years now. I think that, and we'll probably get back to that. These are just more details about the scope. I'm not going to bore you with the details here, but basically this is that Buffington Harbor site, the 99-year lease. That blue dot, or that blue square, is the 3-acre site where the pump station would go. This is what the route would look like from an aerial view to the Lansing Club. Basically, as I mentioned, along INDOT right-of-ways and the NIPSCO right-of-way. We've also had conversations with the CSX Railroad about potentially using their corridor to run the finished water up to the south suburbs. And then you can also see where we would bypass this site with the raw water in the red line that would keep going toward westward toward Joliet. There's a lot of different options as to what the network would look like in the south suburbs, depending on who's in and who's out. But certainly have all the information as to the different possibilities for that. Schedule-wise, 2020 is going to be all about contractual arrangements between the various communities that are looking to be on board. It's also going to be about lining up a firmer financing plan, the WIFIA application, and things along those lines. It will also then lead us to, once we get to the critical mass, formal design, engineering, permitting, land acquisition from 21 through 23. The agency will most likely be hiring an executive director during that period, as well as finalizing the financing. Construction from 24 to 26, with water beginning service in 27, 28. And then for the following 70 years, save hundreds of millions of dollars, because that's the way the numbers will bear out. We had, I touched on the WIFIA application. This is a new funding source that's only been around for about 4 years. It will cover 49% of the project costs, offers a 35-year financing term where you wouldn't even have to start the repayment until year 40. It really is ideal for projects like this, where we're looking to be as cost effective as we can on the front end of the project. We will be submitting for this in July.
You said year 40, you mean year 4?
It would be 5 years after the completion of the project. So 35 plus 5 would be the 40. We'll also be pursuing low-interest IEPA loans and potentially some revenue bonds to fill gaps as would need be. But the important thing on the financing is that at no point would there be any bond financing required from any individual customers. The agency would do all the financing, and this is where the water supply contracts come in. The 50-year contracts for the water supply are what would ultimately support the agency moving forward with all of, whether it's revenue bonds, whether it's EPA loans, whether it's WIFIA loans.
I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt there. That's what differs from the prior one. The prior one, the Village of Alsip and some other communities put their own bonding on the line. This project does not have that.
I come back to this map of the south suburban communities only because as we think about, everyone wants to know, well, what's the water rate going to be? With good reason. It's ultimately, the exact rates are going to depend on how big the system becomes. If it's going to be 20 MGD, is it going to be 35 MGD? Is it going to go out to Joliet only? Is it going to go to Joliet plus another 10 communities out there? It could be anywhere from 20 MGD up to potentially 95 to 100 MGD. So there's a wide range, but the ultimate metric is, that's the most important, is what the dollar per thousand gallons is. And that's why we feel very comfortable with guaranteeing a ceiling on those rates. It may be even lower than the 3% that we're promising in the contracts right now, but we won't know that for sure until we know exactly what the system's going to look like. But just as an example, for the village of Alsip alone, we are not going to worry about the whole region right now, just for Alsip and what that comparison would look like. If in the scenario that we had just 20 MGD in the south suburbs out of that potential 53, plus Joliet without any other towns in Will County, that scenario, which is probably a middle-of-the-range scenario when you look at all the possibilities, from year one, Alsip would be projected to save $184,000. That number would go up to almost $1 million by just year 5, up to $963,000, if you can see it in this number 1 column here. There's a lot of numbers there, and I'm not going to bore you with the details, other than knowing that over the financing period of the project, up to year 40, if we had just 20 MGD in the south suburbs and plus Joliet, Alsip in the first 40 years, Alsip alone would save $186 million based on these projections. And then over the 75-year lifetime of the infrastructure, it would be over $1 billion. If we have more communities join us, those savings would be even greater over that time period. Most of those savings are on the back end, there's no doubt about it, because we do have to finance the project on the front end. But the savings are considerable, even within a 5-year period of that water flowing. Also, it would be saving $1 million a year just based on your current water usage amongst you as well as your customers with Palos Heights and Crestwood. As I said, the exact rates will be calculated once we know who's all in and who isn't. The project is finally scoped. But the guarantee from day one is that the rates will be lower than your current supplier, which in Alsip's case is Chicago. And also that first 10 years would be guaranteed, as Jay had mentioned it, with no rate increase. What we can't guarantee is that all those communities in the south suburbs will start with the same rate. Some of them are currently paying $7. We're going to guarantee we're below 7, but in order for us to guarantee that Alsip is below where you would be, some towns will start out with a little bit higher rate, but still significantly lower than what they're currently paying. Years 11 through 50, as we get a little bit further in and the rates are significantly below, start to become significantly below other suppliers, well, those will average out a little bit further, but we would still hold that commitment in the contract that in any given year you'd never see more than a 2% increase for 50 years. So, customer commitments. I'm going to come back to Jay now.
Thanks, Aaron. Just to wrap this up, in terms of the communities coming on board, Aaron talked about the fact that we need, essentially, we consider 20 million gallons a day as our critical mass. So we're going to talk about how we incentivize communities to do that. So there's application fees that are based on what the water usage is. The 2020 base fee is $150,000 per MGD of what that community's allocation is, what their 2025 water allocation is. And next year, that base fee would go up to $250,000, and then beginning January 1 of 2023, $500,000 per MGD. But because we want to incentivize it, essentially what we're doing is we're saying for the first 20 MGD, it's going to only be $100,000 per MGD. And in fact, there's some significant advantages to the agency if we can get contracts signed prior to July 1, because that's when that WIFIA application has to be in, and so we're discounting it even further to just $50,000 per MGD. So we understand that not every community has, the funding in their budget in any given year to do that, so we've made it possible to do that over 3 years. So 50% of that would have to be paid in year one, 25% in the 2 subsequent years, and you have a copy of that water supply contract in your packet. So again, why are we doing that? Why are we offering such significant savings? It's because of that WIFIA letter, WIFIA application that's due right after the 4th of July. We need to get to that 20 MGD threshold. The sooner we can get there, we're very confident about where we're at in terms of our dialogue with Joliet, and where we believe that really this is going to be the only option that's going to make any financial sense for them at all. But the sooner we get to that 20 million gallons, and I think that's going to happen pretty quickly here because the response subsequent to the February 4 meeting has been tremendous. But the sooner we can get to 20 million gallons, it just increases our leverage with with Joliet, and we need that negotiating power. So, in addition to actually having these lower buy-in fees, the actual water rate is also discounted for the early adopters. We did this because we again wanted to incentivize that. So, to get a water rate that is 5% less for the next 50 years is an enormous sum of savings for each community. So I'm going to. You want to walk through this slide real fast?
It's protected. Just have it in your sheets.
Okay. Just in the interest of time, I'm going to skip that. So I think is 429 actually consistent with theirs?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So that $50,000 per MGD would be that 429 for Alsip, and then you see that broken down 50% year 1, 2, and 3. We wanted to make sure you are aware of that because that's the most aggressive way we've priced it, and of course you're in the middle of doing your own budgets now. So if you are interested in proceeding, it would tell you where you need to budget in terms of year 1.
Just so everyone understands, that application fee, if this doesn't ever come into being, that's what the village would be out. The previous one, the village had bonding authority and ended up being out a lot more. As a percentage, that's not I'll let Dan speak to that, but that number would be 10 times larger if you wait till 2023, is what they just showed us. 50,000 per million gallons a day of allocation versus up to 500,000 later on.
And at the bottom line there, in terms of what that risk is, you'll make that back 238% in just 10 years and just every year thereafter. So again, we tried to structure this as a way so the buy-in was easy for all of the Southland communities. I think this is in your packet as well, so you can study it a little more closely, but essentially it's just a little chart that shows everything in terms of that upfront cost, what the rate guarantees are. We guarantee for those who sign their contract prior to July 1 that it will be a minimum of 5% below their current contracts. After July 1, it would be 3%. And then the formula discount in terms of the overall water rates for then the next 50 years would be 10% below, 5% below, and you see that it's stepping down. So just trying to be very aggressive with those incentives early on. I think we covered that already. Different. So at this point, I think we would attempt to answer any questions that you might have.
I just had a couple, too. I mean, obviously, it seems like a great opportunity to possibly get involved in this program. One thing, until this gets off the ground, you always have to look at who you're purchasing your water from right now, because obviously they're going to be offended. You're going to be leaving their service at some point then too, or let's put it this way, Joliet buys a lot of water, as you said, and they're buying it from Aqua Water Service, and it's surprising Aqua maybe didn't get more competitive, because I don't know that they want to lose a customer like that.
No, actually, Mr. Mayor, they're actually on groundwater wells. Joliet owns their own system.
Oh, really?
Yes, they don't pay anybody right now.
Aqua.
No, for them, it's a function of the aquifer is drying up.
I misunderstood, because I know there's a firm called Aqua, and that's where I was going.
I'm sorry if I wasn't clear. No,
Yeah.
it's a deep well aquifer. They've got 26 wells. They're still on well water.
Because I know Aqua's got a plant near Richmond Park and whatnot.
They've got one down in Kankakee, and they bring water all the way up to University Park. That's correct.
That's where I'm at. Okay, because I've seen it, and when you said Aqua, that's where I thought I was at. Obviously, like, say for instance, right now, with the three communities that are spearheading this, with South Holland, East Hazel Crest, and Thornton, where are they buying water from currently?
Yeah, so the Village of South Holland gets our water directly from the City of Chicago. Thornton gets their water from Chicago Heights, and
Which gets it from Hammond.
Right, that I know.
And East Hazel Crest gets their water through Harvey,
Gotcha.
who gets it from Chicago.
Because obviously, we're buying our water from Chicago right now, which was relevant in what in your presentation. Have you seen any movement by the city of Chicago to maybe have they voiced an opinion about getting more competitive, not to lose people like us?
I can speak a little to that. The rates that they charge us are the same rates they charge their customers. So when these gentlemen talk about how the southern communities are fixing their system internally, it's true. We're paying their retail rates. They twice have had some pretty large increases. They made a promise, they didn't keep it, but they've been keeping it the past few years. Their rates are based on the CPIW, which is the wage rate of inflation in the Chicagoland area. They have been keeping to that. Right now, I believe that's at 2.1%. So when they were showing those three colored lines, that would have been just above the black one, if they keep it. They made that commitment once before, and they raised it rather dramatically for a few years again afterwards, but they've been keeping it since then. But they're between a rock and a hard place. They have lines that are over 100 years old, with oakum joints and lead joints, etc. They've got to be replacing their pipes, just like all the Southland communities have to replace theirs, and this was a way for them to subsidize doing so.
Which was my next question. Dan Travin's our water commissioner here, by the way, too. So, Dan, I'm not an engineer. How many water feeder lines come from Chicago to us right now? I know the premise of having water storage in the community, but let's say hypothetically you get a water main break from a main pipeline coming out of Chicago. How many lines feed our town?
Well, recently we had Chicago had a leak on the main line that feeds us along Pulaski Avenue, and there's, depending on where the break is, there's only so many lines, and currently there's one line on Pulaski that feeds us, as well as Midlothian and Markham. And if they continue to have an issue there, we would have a struggle, and that's why we have an emergency backup connection with Blue Island. So we'd have to get our water supply through them. But yeah, there's limited access, and yes, redundancy is important. The EPA requires that we have some kind of backup.
That's where I was going at next, gentlemen. It was, I like the flyover look that you did and everything too, but let's just say, regardless of how many easements you can be granted, we're solely reliant on a single pipe. I'm guessing, right, to get the source.
The idea would be to potentially have Chicago even as a backup supply. The infrastructure is already there, especially in an emergency situation.
Okay. I didn't know that
just like many individual suburbs have emergency interconnects with each other.
I didn't know that would still be possible.
But if you did that, though, you still have to maintain a certain percentage of water through Chicago in order to keep that as an emergency backup.
It would be you're probably correct. It would need to be negotiated. I have an example, like Calumet City, for example. They get some of their water currently from Hammond, some of it from Chicago.
Right.
South Holland actually takes some from the Hammond system and some from the Chicago system the same way.
But that being the case, then whatever percentage you have to maintain to keep that water right through the city, then that diminishes the returns that you're going to see from the proposal that you've got here.
Potentially.
Well, and that leads to the one question I have is, just briefly looking at the contract, you reference a minimum take or pay, and Schedule A isn't defined in there, but, what are those minimums? And, is it a percentage based on allocation or minimum average, daily demand?
It would be a percentage of the no community usually uses their entire allocation. It wouldn't be based on the entire allocation. We've got to design the system based on the allocation.
Right.
But the take or pay, it would be that would be part of the negotiation of each individual contract depending on the community.
And then, is Joliet already guaranteed a water allocation from Lake Michigan?
They're not. Nothing's a guarantee. That's a great question. I'm very confident that they're going to get one, though. All indications are that they will. They've done a lot of coordination with IDNR over the last couple of years.
I was on the phone with IDNR on Friday for 2 hours talking about our water audit, and I did pose that question to him, and he's confident that the IDNR has enough in their, water allocation from the, for the state of Illinois to include Joliet.
Yeah.
And they're going to lower ours and everyone else's to get there, possibly.
Correct. And
water usage on Lake Michigan is down between 20 and 30% over the last decade. There's a lot of factors. Ever since we had the Great Recession, there's a lot of water efficient appliances these days. There's a lot of conservation efforts, primarily because of the cost of water, I think, in some cases. And even as a boat owner on Lake Michigan, the water levels are actually at an all-time high. So I believe that the allocation is certainly available.
I was just going to say the same thing. With all the savings going on, that would explain why the water level's so high right now then, too. Wait till all those boats come out this spring, too, and everybody gets flooded when you drop so much weight on top of that thing at one time then, too. The only other questions I had, too, were, obviously, I can appreciate the charts that you had demonstrated to say that the current rate is almost 4 times what it was in 2006 and stuff, or will be by this June, is what I'm saying. 40-year debt service at $28 million. And again, depends on our amount of usage, too, and what volume of water we're going to use. Just ballpark, Kent, can we afford something like that?
No, that's for the whole system. That's not us.
I thought we were breaking out with...
No, as a matter of fact, again, last time we went through a process like this, we were one of the players. We're not one of the players. Last time, we had to put our own full faith and credit of the village of Alsip on there. We don't have to do that. What we have to do is a buy-in. They have to build a system. We're out a buy-in if they don't build the system, but that's it. There's no cleaning out Dan's fund balance as we did to him last time when that went south. The real players in the game, one of the 3 of them is behind me. There's 3 players in the game. What they pay for their water is irrelevant. If they're taking the risk, they may get rewards. It's irrelevant. The real question is, what's the risk and reward for Alsip? The risk is that buy-in. If that buy-in is done before it's part of the first 20 million gallons a day, and by July 1st, that risk isn't anywhere near as much as if you start to go further down. It's a 5% discount from the city of Chicago. It's guaranteed for the next 10 years. Meanwhile, the city of Chicago goes up, and then a maximum of 2% a year after that. I will tell you, we're more likely to be closer to the 2% than most of those others downstream. The reason for that is, as they said, we pay a lot less than a lot of others, and over time they're trying to get them to do this. They're trying to get them to level. But what's it matter? Again, what others get doesn't matter. At most, we're going to see a 2% increase. And that's what we're basically getting from Chicago right now. Again, the CPIW is 2.1% right now. So 0% for 10 years with a discount before that, and then at most a 2%. And the part that I think the part that's not being articulated here is right now we get our water from very, very old pipes in Chicago. What this is, with an old system of filtration, they literally, the filtration system's over 100 years old. It is literally sand. They put water at the top and let it filter. It's an old-fashioned technique. We now have modern filters. We would have modern pipes. We'd have brand new pipes that would last 100 years with proper maintenance. That's where your water would be coming through. Brand new pipes. You'd know exactly what the maintenance on that cost is because they're new pipes. Whereas we can only guess at what Chicago's maintenance is going to cost on all these old pipes that they may or may not even understand.
If there's one thing that I could add, in that 50-year guarantee, that 2% maximum, that is 2% maximum, the number. It's not tied to any index whatsoever. So if we end up at some point over that 50-year period and we have a bout of inflation like it was in the 70s when 8, 9, 10% inflation or even higher, the 50-year contract is still capped at 2%.
2% increments.
That's exactly, capped at 2% in any given year.
The last question I had was, obviously, we were always told that you can't profit from a natural resource, but, you know, when I was like an alternate way back when they had the Jawa scenario, in fact, it was in the paper that Hammond was trying to implement a major user tax that really was intimidating. Is that going to happen again? Because, you know, obviously this is where that water is going, is through Hammond. Are we going
It's actually not going through Hammond. It's going around Hammond.
Really? Okay. Because I remember that the Mayor McDermott was in the paper saying that, you know, and obviously the paper drafted what how they felt was it looked entertaining, but it was, you know, this is my new casino. He was looking at Lake Michigan, like, in a way, you know, and it's like, you know, it was a turnoff to everybody, that kind of thing, too. And I understand this looks, obviously, this seems like a great project. I just don't want to get sandbagged with something like that then, too. That's all, so.
Great point and a very valid concern, for sure. We did try negotiating, and we thought we had a deal with Hammond back about 18 months ago. After multiple iterations of them moving the goalposts on us, believe me, and I realize that the last group would probably remember some of that as well.
Right.
But when we got to a certain point almost a year ago, and we decided, hey, when Joliet a year ago is when they narrowed down our option as one of their 5 finalists, we started getting serious about saying, hey, we've got to have something signed. And that's why we took a really hard look at other alternatives, and we found this group that is involved. It's interesting you bring up casino because it's on the current Majestic Star site.
Right.
This group is that casino is moving. That's relocating. They got a land license, and they're going to be building on the Borman Expressway. It's under construction as we speak. And so that site on the lake is no longer going to be a riverboat, and that is part of what enabled us to be able to get this long-term lease. And so we were able to get a signed agreement with those folks, and we're not involving Hammond at all.
Okay. Good. Rick.
Has the present work that's been done thus far been paid for?
Partially.
Where's the other partial come from?
There's between the attorneys and the engineers, we're currently working until things get to a design contract next year. And we haven't been paid in 2 years probably.
And that's the problem that I saw and the sting that we got last time. Last time we were sold, this is what the cost is going to be, all this work has been done, here we are, ground zero, what wonderful thing. Then all of a sudden, all the players in the game turned in their invoices as soon as the municipalities funded this thing. And then, how much money did we lose? 10 million the first day?
Yeah, 1.6 overall, but yeah.
Well, but, you know, all of a sudden $10 million was gobbled up by all that work that nobody talked about. Oh, by the way, invoices are sitting out there. We had the accountant that was involved in the very beginning. Quite frankly, in my opinion, the guy should have went to jail.
It was Joe Leckie. He's no longer with us.
Yeah, and a couple of the people that you're talking about here already, I attended those meetings, and when I saw Ice Miller submit some of those invoices, and they didn't have a water in the pipe, and they're charging $600 an hour to go out there and get financing. To me, it was just a sin. The communities, I'd like to know why Oak Lawn hasn't been approached on something like this. They're a huge supplier to a lot of the Southland. And it seems like such a major player would be such an advantage. Why haven't they been approached or considered?
At this point, it's a function of distance from the lake. In many respects, it's a function of.
But you can get
there's
the building.
and there's competing interests. Some of the communities that we're talking with are current Oak Lawn suppliers, or current Oak Lawn customers, and they're not happy. Three of the communities are currently customers of Oak Lawn, and they're looking for that same alternative as South Holland and Thornton and East Hazel Crest are.
Okay. And then you spoke about the signed agreement, and believe me, I mean no disrespect here, but we had a gentleman come in here and tell us they had a signed agreement. And after, a year, 2 years, we found out it was nothing but a bold-faced lie.
Jay had mentioned this earlier, that we are a public agency. We're a governmental entity. Our agency board took formal action at its December 3rd board meeting, in which it was on a publicly published agenda. It is a signed document. It is in the record.
Yeah, we had that with the Jawa, too.
Well, that we didn't.
Not with the water supply source.
Yeah, I won't even say the name, but it was an elected official from another community that came in right here to our board meeting and said they had a contract and they didn't. And that's why I explained probably when we met on this a couple of seasons ago, Aaron, was obviously you can understand the apprehension a little bit, but again, it's America getting past and being transparent, as you said too, Jay, is to say that, that's what Trustee Halzell is referring to is, what are we getting into? And I hate to think that, just even though you're doing some preliminary stuff, I get it, that you need to recruit towns to participate in something like this. That is a great question, though, too, on the Oak Lawn side, because they're right next door to us there, too. And I know they're putting considerable money into their infrastructure to feed the communities that they feed and stuff.
What I would say is, I don't think the agency would be closed-minded to that.
Yeah.
I think it's just a conversation that hasn't been had yet.
Yeah.
But why? I mean, obviously you guys are forward-thinking. Obviously you're intelligent men. Why?
I don't know that we thought it was realistic that they would even want to consider it, knowing that they've already got.
If you don't ask the question, you'll never get an answer.
That's a great point. I don't disagree with you. I think part of that also is that I just don't know that we have any existing relationships with the Oak Lawn folks at this point.
Right.
We have it with some of their customers, and we've been talking with them.
And then you're talking about acquiring the Harvey infrastructure. Their system's older than ours is.
We wouldn't acquire their entire system. Only the spine, the supply line from Chicago, the pump station, the reservoirs.
How old is that?
Much of it is about 60 years old. It was built in about 1960. But much, especially the pump station, has been fully rehabbed over the past several years. So the receiver took over and has made tremendous improvements.
Its capacity is way underutilized.
Yeah.
So Robinson Engineering actually did 50% all the way up. Robinson Engineering did an assessment of that specific system, and that pump station.
It was ordered by the court that the receiver had an assessment. It was 2 years ago. That pump station, which we redesigned back in about 2003, has the capacity today for 22 million gallons a day, and they only pump 8, which is why the agency was thinking if we could make an asset purchase and own it ourselves, that would be able to supply many other communities at a very low cost.
Would you be willing to purchase Alsips?
We don't have that. So also presently is 6.53 million gallons, and our entrance fee is calculated at 8.582 based on 2025 allocations.
And the reason for that, it's the same for every community. We had to set a fixed number. The actual water use varies every year by every community. It varies up and down a few percent, often almost on an annual basis.
I think you're making reference, though, to your 8.5.
8.5 is the allocation.
Customers.
Both of those numbers include your customers, Palos Heights and Crestwood. The 8.5 is your allocation. The 6.5 it was your 2017 usage.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. I don't know what it was in 18 or 19. 17 was the latest data that
I think the corollary here would be property taxes. It doesn't really matter what your EAV versus rate is.
Exactly,
they want a certain dollar amount, so they pick something that's fixed.
A reference. The other part is some towns might use 70% of their allocation. Some towns might use 80% of their allocation. It's the idea of just having a fixed reference point.
And then lastly, and obviously you guys have been doing this for a length of time, It just seems like it's the car pressure. If you sign today, I'm going to give you a deal. Walk out the door, it's off the table. And here, the presentation's being made, and in 4 months is when this thing has to be signed, sealed, and the check written. And we've already been once stung, and I still pain from that. And I base my decision based upon all the promises that were told to me. And they were all bullshit. And I'd apologize, but that's what it was. And for me to sit there and come up with $429,000 as a buy-in to this, and then if all of a sudden it doesn't come to fruition, oh well. I'm sorry, but it's when you put out money for something and then through no fault of our own and no control over this either, that's a ton of money.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly respect that cynicism. South Holland wasn't a part of that jowl years ago, but over the last few years as we've worked through this, I've had a lot of conversations with folks who were, and there's a lot of reasons for the folks who were involved to be upset. This is a very different animal. I mean, this is about something that is just for us, for the Southland, with full transparency, no profit motive, complete transparency at every level. So, and there, it is fitting and proper to ask every one of those tough questions that you're asking, and I don't have any reservations about answering every one of those questions with confidence as best we can. All that we are trying to do, I mean, look, we already have a water source through the city of Chicago in terms of the village of South Holland. We got involved in this because we said we cannot have our future tied to this unpredictable rate increases where the rate triples over the last 12 years. And so we are trying to do this really as a way to serve the entire Southland. Nobody involved has any motives other than how do we protect us, the Southland. So we tried to structure everything from the way the contracts were written to what the guarantees were to try to address a lot of the BS things that happened in the previous situation. So we didn't want people to have, you know, the questions, so we built it in. We didn't want the potential for, you know, Aaron talked about, you know, could Chicago privatize the system the way they did the parking meters, where, you know, it used to cost $2, now it costs you $8. Those things are real. So we put into the contract that it's not assignable, because we're trying to build in the protections for all of us. So, I mean, those are great questions. The questions about, well, you know, have these folks been paid? They haven't been paid yet, but that's not on any municipality. That's just the agency. No municipality has any responsibility whatsoever for what they haven't been paid. As communities join and we have revenues coming in, they will get paid. But no community is on the hook for that. So we tried to do everything we could to design this so that this is for us, the Southland communities only, and we are all protected. We put all the guarantees in because, for instance, look, I don't know what the administration is going to be in the city of Chicago or the people who buy their water in Chicago Heights or Hammond. I don't know who those administrations are going to be in 5 years or 10 years. And quite frankly, no one knows who the administration is going to be in South Holland or Thornton or East Hazelcrest in 5 years or 10 years. So we built the contracts with all the guarantees, basically so it doesn't matter. So that everybody who's involved, all the Southland communities, are totally protected. That's what our ambition has been from the get-go.
Jay,
But yet there's one more. I apologize. 28 to 30 communities involved in what this proposal is thus far. 3 entities sitting at the board.
There were originally 10 that were meeting for a period of about 2 years, from 2016 and 17, I would say. Yeah. And they originally, the 10 communities signed an intergovernmental agreement amongst themselves. They each chipped in a little bit of money to basically go renegotiate the deal with Hammond, which took almost a year to finally get to where we thought we were going to have a signed agreement with Hammond. Hammond reneged, quite frankly. I can't say it any nicer or any plainer than that.
Well, we saw that with Jawa.
Right.
Hammond did the same. Whiting did the same.
And one of the and your points are spot on. And you know, Robinson has been the engineer for a lot of these communities for close to a half century, more than a half century in some cases. There's no way we're going to put our reputation on something that we're not 100% committed to make sure that we're recommending in the best interest of the communities. And one of the very first things that, starting back in 2016 when that group of 10 got together, is and they put a very relatively meager amount of money. I think they put in $10,000 apiece just to kind of get the ball rolling with Hammond. And we told them all along, you don't ever want to be spending big money or going any further until you have a signed agreement for the supply source at the lake. The old group, I don't want to talk badly about other consultants, but it was a path that you got led down, unfortunately, that occurred. I don't know that I can do anything.
Got before the horse.
The cart got before the horse. And we insisted to all these communities that we don't do anything until that is done. We never did get it done with Hammond. And that's why we weren't here 3 years ago.
Time, essentially. The other communities kind of, once things got so frustrating with Hammond, and they kind of gave up and bowed out. We felt it was important to keep pushing because we think it matters. When you're talking about literally just for Alsip over 75 years, it's $1 billion. So you can imagine the billions for the entire Southland region. We thought that was worth fighting for. 3 small communities stayed in, and here we are.
I get it, and I bought into the original premise. You know, my concern, and again, no disrespect, but I'm looking at a pig here with a different set of lipstick on.
No.
If there's one thing that we can do, there's a lot of questions that need to be explored for sure. There's one thing we can do, and quite frankly, it is a FOIA-able document. You know, the agreement that has been signed has been signed. That never happened with the old group. I know that because the group brought Robinson in on the tail end of that. They tried to save it in the final 6 or 8 months. So I know enough of the history of that. I've got a copy of all the documents from before. There was never a signed document with Hammond in terms of that water supply contract.
Right,
And
but
we
I
do
was
have
at
one
those
now.
meetings, and I apologize, but I was at those meetings and I saw vendors go out and do soil sampling tests for where the pipeline was presumed to go.
That was a cart before the horse.
Yeah, and there was never a pipe in the water. It was, I'm sorry, but it was absolutely a travesty.
And I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
That was wrong.
So I was just looking, trustee, I didn't see the list, but that was my question, like, can you share, like, who are signed up? Who's participating?
Well, right now, South Holland, Thornton, and East Hazel Crest have all, you guys have adopted the water supply contract. They've adopted the,
I get that, but I'm saying anybody else right now?
It was just presented this month.
it was just presented 3 weeks ago.
I was there for that. I'm sorry, I thought
We
maybe you had others
met
and
last
stuff yet, too.
Wednesday with
Okay.
Hazel Crest. We're here tonight. We're in Cal City tomorrow night.
Okay.
We're in Midlothian a week from Wednesday,
All right.
on the 4th. We've met also, we've got a meeting coming up with the Village of Glenwood. That's what I know at the current time.
Okay. So does everybody, so I didn't misunderstand, when you said that you had the 3 communities, I understood that, but those were the 3 founding communities. Everyone has a seat at the table once you join the organization and stuff then too? I mean, is that how this is going to go, or
No,
just the 3 founding
They-
organizations?
the Village of Alsip was one of the founding organizations of the Jawa, and it took risk and reward, and the reward never panned out. The system was never built. It lost money. We're actually in a better place that there are other municipalities out there willing to do the risk and reward. Maybe they get a big reward. What do we care? The question is, what is our risk and what is our reward? They have greatly reduced the risk. The $429,000, if you do it by July 1st, is much, much lower than anything we were looking at before. And what hasn't been said here is we supply water to 2 other municipalities. That is not solely on the Village of Alsip. one way or the other, probably through operating costs, but one way or the other, if we go down this road, those costs are going to be shared. So actually, the Village of Alsip's risk is even much lower than that. And to Trustee Dizell's point, is there a risk this doesn't get built, and even $1 flushing down the toilet, pun intended, is a bad idea? We do need to have some sort of understanding about, is this a viable project? They're telling us at 20 million gallons a day, it's viable. I think we'd want a little more proof to that to show viability. But if it is viable, that's the risk, is whatever our portion of $429,000 is, which is a very, very small amount compared to where we were last time. We are not going to be a part of it. It is 3 municipalities. That's a done deal. They're the ones, however,
That's fine.
taking the risk.
We just
and
didn't break it
don't
out
need to
that
be
way.
part
That's
of
all.
that.
So,
Yeah.
If I could add also to that, Kent is spot on without a doubt. Two things: the 429,000, again, spread amongst your entire water system, which is the 2 municipalities plus yourselves. For that 3-year period, it's about 6 cents per 1,000 gallons. That in terms of the overall, you're paying Chicago $4 for the water. You've got your own rate that you add to charge your residents. It's 6 cents per the 1,000 gallons for a 3-year period. The other thing, and this is also different from 5 years ago, 6 years ago, Joliet is going to do this with or without the south suburbs. Joliet has an environmental emergency, pretty much, that they've got to do this. They are committed to spend, it's been on the radio, I'm not sure if it is, but they're going to spend $1 billion to get this done. And they've already been approved for that federal WIFIA funding. They got their approval back in November to take the next step with that financing. So what the south suburbs has here is an ultimate opportunity to be on a level playing field, to have both Joliet and whoever else joins them to benefit from the economies of scale that would be achieved by all of us building one regional system. And that's really a big game changer from what was here 5 years ago also. This system is going to get built. It's a function of how do we best take advantage of the opportunity for all the south suburbs, which is what Jay has been trying to explain, is we're looking at it as a regional thing. For those first 20 years from now, the 3 founding members aren't going to have any different scenarios in that chart that was handed out than any of the other communities, at least any of the other early adopters.
That's fine. I had a little tunnel vision from the last episode and stuff, so sometimes you're used to a chair and you thought you were still there. But no, I can appreciate, and Kent broke that out well, and I appreciate what you just said, too, about the WIFIA approval that Joliet gets, no matter what, they're going to be doing this regardless.
And where's the filtration plant going to be located?
Right now, our principal location would be at Lansing Country Club, which is right on the state line in Lansing, a little bit south of the Borman Expressway.
And Joliet would be purchasing at a slightly different rate because they would not go through that filtration.
They're going to take raw water.
They want their filtration, their own in Joliet. They're doing raw water.
Okay.
But again, if you get bigger pipes, there is economies of scale and everyone benefits from that. But even without Joliet, they could build this as long as they get 20 million gallons a day.
Correct.
Just to clarify, in terms of the 3 communities, there is no benefit to the 3 communities for doing this, other than what's in the chart, the discount on the rates, which I talked about. It's 0, depending on when you adopt, 0, 2%, 3%, 5%, 10%. So ours is at the 10% level. That's it.
Which is exactly where the early adopters.
But there is no benefit in any way, shape, or form, no financial compensation. There is nothing to the 3 communities who have put this together.
Okay.
Other than also saving all this money over the next 100 years.
Right.
I appreciate you guys, looking out for the Southland and everything, but our vision is a little bit smaller. We have to look out for our residents here. And even though Mayor Ryan and Trustee Dalzell were here involved in the debacle that was Jawa, I was just barely getting involved. And, to Trustee Dalzell's point, it sounds great, all right, but usually when something sounds too good, it might be too good. And, you still haven't really answered this question. What kind of, if you pay for a product, you want to get something in return? Something, anything. I mean, 1.6 million, it just disappeared. If we go ahead and do this, what kind of legal guarantees do we have that is going to actually have legs? I mean, or is there a way that we can be refunded if this doesn't come out?
Yeah, I mean, as Ken said, that is money that is at risk. There's no doubt about that. While we have been working behind the scenes, ridiculous numbers of hours over the past few years, having meeting after meeting after meeting, and trying to get all this to where it is today, to where you have a model contract and that envelope in front of you, and the system designed, and all the meetings to get the Indiana infrastructure group up and running. We've been investing, but we cannot afford, as three small communities, to continue that process. And so we have no choice but to say to the people who want to be on board, you have to help share that risk with us. So there isn't a mechanism where we could somehow guarantee that that's not lost. It is money put at risk. We're not hiding that. I mean, it is what it is. It is a remarkably minuscule risk, all things considered. I mean, I think the chances of this, we're going to do this even if it was just us and Joliet. I mean, Joliet themselves is 24 million gallons. So I think that the risks are incredibly small, but it is money at risk. There's no doubt about that.
Okay. My point is, if Alsip is the only one that decides to go along with this, as well as Joliet, is that $500,000 going to get a pipeline to our border?
20 million gallons is what we've judged is kind of the critical mass. So between the three communities that are already in, that's 4 million gallons. So Joliet adds another, 8? So there's...
also adds another 8.5.
Also adds another 8.5. So now you're at 12.5 million gallons. And we've just begun these conversations with communities. So I think that the chances of that being the issue are incredibly remote. Quite frankly, the question is going to be more of who's going to be in on the first 20 than it is, are we going to get to 20?
I can share this. There's one of the communities that's currently a customer of Hammond. So they actually enjoy a lower current water supply cost than Alsip does. They're less than Chicago's rate. And their contract isn't up with Hammond until 2026. But they are viewing this as an insurance policy. For them, the $50,000 per MGD, if they get on before July 1st, they're viewing it as an insurance policy. They might never, or they might not buy water from the agency right on day one if they can negotiate a better deal with Hammond that way. I think they are really liking the long-term aspects of this, but in the short term, they're viewing it as an insurance policy. I would say the second part of this is that, and it's also one of the reasons that we staggered the payment 50% the first year, then 25, then 25, partially to help communities that might not have, the strongest financial wherewithal to do it all at once. But that's also another risk mitigation technique, right? If a year from now, if say a community comes on board this spring, and a year from now the agency is not able to show any meaningful progress, whether with Joliet, whether to make public announcements about, hey, we've purchased property, or we've done this, or we've done that, well, communities probably still have, on the backside, that back 50% is not coming for those other 2 years. So it's a way to step into that risk, I guess is what I'm trying to say, which I know the last group never had either.
Trustee, I think that's the thing that you really need to look at here, too, is, while we can be sour and Trustee Dalzell and I agree. On behalf of the village, we sat through something rough. I think you're looking at a real you got new partners here, and I think it's going to be interesting to see who joins in then too. Like you said, Jay, you got presentations. You're just getting this off the ground. And I thought you actually had more people signed in, but like you said, when you're looking at towns like Cal City, they're buying their water from Hammond, right?
They are.
So they need another source. They need to make things more affordable for their people, and they're a good, reputable community. And again, we jump on board with a community like Joliet then, too, at the same time. This is huge. They're going to be pulling the water out to their own filtration plant and stuff, but I think that's really what we really need to evaluate is who's running the boat, who's driving the boat now. We don't have those partners that we had last time. And I think that's where we put some faith in these. And granted, East Hazelcrest and Thornton are small communities. I don't know the mayor in East Hazelcrest, but the mayor in Thornton, and certainly your mayor, Don DeGraff, great guys. And I know they wouldn't put themselves out there on something like this without having some faith in what they're going to try to do and stuff then too. So I think you need to qualify who's going to try and do this. And we're just sharing part of this 429 as far as this is a feasibility study, right? Right.
Well, I would characterize this as being beyond, far beyond feasibility.
Okay.
It's actual implementation. but
Okay,
yes.
that's fine. Okay.
And there's going to be, for the next 5 or 6 years or 7 years until the water actually would flow, there are, as the old group recalls, there are administrative costs along the way. So these funds will go to help defer some of those administrative costs over these next few years because the 3 communities can't absorb all of those by themselves.
Yeah, that's all I'm saying is professionally, I'm not going to drop names. Trustee Dalzell and I sat through it, and I'll agree with him that I really would have appreciated at the time 5 years ago if all professional agencies had came in with a prorated fee or some type until the project got off the ground, but everybody was billing at top dollar. And it's like, oh God, it's like every time the armored car pulled up, it pulled away again. It's like, God, to me, I just felt there should have been more of an effort to obviously prorate things. That was my whole thing. And rather than just throwing money at a project, and as you said, Jay, if you're further along, so be it, and you're qualifying a better source on supply, too. We're not dealing with, because there was an issue with Whiting, Indiana, breaking a contract with Hammond. There was all kinds of layers. It was ridiculous and stuff then, too. So
You're correct. I'm familiar with most of what you're referring to there, and I have a copy of the contract that the last program manager had with the prior group, and it was egregious. I can't say it any other way. We purposely, especially because we had only these 3 communities that have put a lot of effort into these last couple of years, we intentionally structured we're taking risk right now. Robinson's taking risk, Ice Miller's taking risk, but we structured our own contract with the agency to be a pay for performance. If this never gets off the ground, we never get paid. If it only gets 20 MGD, we're only going to get paid for 20 MGD. If we're capable, if we're successful in turning it into 80 MGD, well, that's where maybe we'll make a little more money. But we're going to only go as far as the agency goes in terms of what that compensation structure will be.
That's actually a really good point because unlike the previous experience where they turned in all kinds of ridiculous bills, both Robinson and Ice Miller are totally at risk. If this doesn't get billed, they spent the last few years working for absolutely free. They're not going to get a penny. So
they already collected.
It's a very different animal.
Okay.
So what's our initial cost? You said it was 50,000 per million?
50,000 per MGD of your 2025 IDNR allocation, which when you add it up, it's 429,100.
Over 3 years. So
over 3 year
50% in year one. And
I'm sorry, maybe I wasn't. I meant cost of the actual water for the village.
Oh, the water rate?
When the water would flow, if you're on
28 or whatever.
If you're on board before July 1st, you would have a guaranteed at least 5% below where Chicago is at that time. And that would be fixed for 10 years. So if we're estimating Chicago is going to be at 476. 5% of that number would be about 24 cents. You'd be at least 24 cents below Chicago in year one, and it would be fixed for the next 10 years.
At a minimum.
At a minimum, right.
So I mentioned the 420.
You have this slide in your packet?
Yeah, they do. So I mentioned the 429,100 is something that would be shared with the other communities because, frankly, they'd be sharing the benefits as well when this gets built. So it would be shared. Even if it wasn't, and it will be, I ran the numbers based on different scenarios of inflation rate increases. If Chicago increased by less than 1%, 0.82%, which was the lowest one I could come up with, that $429,000 would be recouped the very first year. If it were increased to $200,000, you'd be $142,000 ahead after paying off that the very first year. The real risk here is not the $429,000 sounds like a large amount of money. It sounds like Rogers building another pool. I mean, that's the number we just threw out for the pool. There's a $410,000 earlier in the meeting right before this. It sounds like a very large number. Is a portion of Dan's budget or Dan's overall fund balance? It's not. If you recall what Dan is spending this next year, he has so many projects. It's bad timing for him for it to be this year because he already, between the water tower and his water main, is putting out a lot. But in the grand scheme of things, even in relationship to his budget, it's a small number. And again, it's going to be shared by by two other municipalities. I think the risk, we have two risks really. I said one of them, which is that it doesn't get built, and in which case we're at $429,100 if we paid it all. As they point out, you pay 50% the first year, another 25% the next, and another 25%. If it looks like it's going downhill, you're not going to pay it all out. They're going to be pretty far into the process.
Just one question, gentlemen. Of that first year payment, would you consider holding payment, from the village until you had your guaranteed 20, million gallons from other customers signed on?
I guess that would be something I'd have to go back to the board. I don't want to speak on their behalf. It's a reasonable question, but I don't want to speak for the board.
I mean, you'd have a signed commitment from the village of Alsip, just we would withhold
You get a
payment until you
contingent
got your
commitment.
20.
Contingent commitment.
Like buying a house.
And the other thing, obviously, we would like some sort of, we're taking your word that 20 million gallons a day is a viable pod. I mean, we would need a little bit of more reassurance than your word on that. But if there is, that's the number, and we hit that number and we sign on, this is an important slide. I know there's a lot of numbers in the packet, and I tried to encourage them to take out numbers, at least the first time around. But this is the one that really shows the difference. That top row shows 50,000 per million gallons a day. And again, this is not, there's 2 million gallons a day in there. One is what we actually use, which is 6.53 million gallons a day. And one was based on the allocation, and that's 8.5. So it's the 8.5 you'd be multiplying times. But if you notice, it starts out at 50,000. By after January 1st of 2023, it's 10 times that. And the discount, the next one is the discount from Chicago the day the pipes open. So we won't be paying Chicago's rates anymore if we did it by July 1st and we were part of the first 20 million. We'd have a 5% discount that day and that exact same rate for the next 10 years. So that 5% will actually grow as City of Chicago's rates get bigger. Yep. The last two is the important part. There is a formula, and from what we've heard so far, it's a mysterious formula. We know nothing about this formula. I'll be frank about it. But they've told us that over years 11 through 50, we pay a lot lower rate than almost anyone who doesn't buy it directly from Hammond. We're not downstream. We don't have a lot of other middlemen. We have the City of Chicago. Ultimately, we won't see any more than a 2% rate increase. We're going to see a higher rate increase than other municipalities. But that 10% discount will slow that process. But we ultimately, 100 years from now, we're all going to be paying the same amount. Our discount won't be...
But it'll still be lower than Chicago.
It will be much lower than Chicago. again, the risk here is that it doesn't get built. But our risk for that is much lower. There's no geo backing on it, which means it's not the full faith and credit of the village. We don't have to raise rates anymore to do it. We don't have to tax to do it. There's no property taxes involved in this. That's one worth coming back to. If you're going to come back to one slide, that's probably it.
And if there's one thing that we might not have emphasized enough, we talked about July 1st being important because of our WIFIA application, and that is accurate. And we touched on the idea of it's important for us to have negotiating power or leverage with Joliet. And we didn't touch on this last component. Joliet has spent over $1 million in the past 2 years studying this issue because they've had to. And they looked at every alternative they could, and they did a great job with it. They looked at, I was, as an engineer, as a professional, I was very impressed by the work effort that their team put together. One of the things that they did, when you consider how massive that undertaking was, they laid out a schedule 2 years ago, and they followed it to a T. They had they hired a consulting engineering firm. There's 4 firms that partnered up, and they held their schedule to a T, and they're continuing to do so. They're already out for RFQs right now for their next phase of engineering. And per my meeting with their city manager at the beginning of this month, they are going to make the staff is going to make their recommendation to their city council in November of this year. Specifically, are they going to go it alone? Are they going to partner with the agency? Or are they going to maybe pull totally back and just buy water from Chicago? Those are their 3 options right now. And so they are, in the first portion of this year, going to thoroughly examine each of those. But I have based on their past history these last 2 years on this very important issue to their community, I have no doubt whatsoever they are going to make a decision what they're doing by November. So that's really another reason from the agency standpoint that we feel it's critical to incentivize this July 1st date, so that if we don't have our 20 MGD by then, they're going to go it alone, and maybe we'll be the ones buying raw water from them instead of vice versa.
Okay.
And so that's another reason that the south suburbs is really, we have a great opportunity to at least be on a level playing field with a lot of these Will County communities that are going to grow and grow and grow over the next century because they've still got a lot of vacant land out there. So the water usage that passes through there can, over a long period of time, be utilized to help maintain even lower rates for the south suburbs.
Well, that's the question I had. Like Trustee Dazell brought up, why hasn't Oak Lawn been approached in regards to this deal? And then with Joliet, it seems like Joliet's like that missing piece that needs to happen in order for this to work. Because there's other large municipalities in Will County, like the city of Naperville, the village of Bolingbrook, and so forth. So is Joliet being presented an opportunity to connect to their water system if they get it from the city of Chicago as well?
Naperville is on the DuPage Water Commission, so they already have Lake Michigan water through Chicago and through DuPage. Bolingbrook is already on Lake Michigan water through Illinois American, which gets their water through Bedford Park in Chicago. Joliet is looking more at regional partners that are on that aquifer that are not currently on Lake Michigan water, like Romeoville or Lockport or Crest Hill or Shorewood, communities, Shanahan. I think that's their primary group of communities that they're talking with, because the other communities are already on Lake Michigan water, and I don't know that they're necessarily looking to change that. DuPage Water Commission was one of the agencies that they examined in that $1 million study that they did, and Joliet determined for 2 reasons. 1, cost, and 2, Joliet would have no control whatsoever over their system. They decided to dismiss that as an option. Okay. With respect to Oak Lawn, to be quite honest, ever since Trustee Dalzell brought it up, it's been on my mind of maybe we ought to be setting up, meeting up. We're not closed-minded to it. We just didn't think there was any chance that Oak Lawn would consider it seriously. But I think that's something that we're going to take as a takeaway from here to examine.
Yeah, if you keep pushing
Any other questions? How about this side? Well, I'll tell you, gentlemen, great discussion tonight yet, too, and I really put a lot of light on this, and Kent, I appreciate some of the breakdown you gave on that, too. And Kent and I were there at the February 4th meeting, and there was quite a few municipalities at that meeting then, too, so...
There were 16 communities there.
Yeah, that was over in South Holland, where we were at for that. So, again, we're going to stay in touch. We're going to follow up and have some more discussions, probably our next committee meeting in a couple of weeks, where everybody's got a chance to kind of go through the literature and so forth then, too. And if we have any other questions, certainly I'll dial you up and stuff then, too, okay?
Thank you very much for your time.
Just sign in, please.
Thank you.
We'll finish up the rest of the meeting here. What I have next was the...
I
Still
believe
on water and sewer.
Trustee Navasparza has point 2.
Yes, item 2, request for authorization to have M.E. Simpson perform a water distribution leak survey for the sum not to exceed $19,500. And sorry. Go ahead.
When you're done with that one,
Oh, no.
before you're done.
Go ahead. Commissioner Triban, if you'd like to speak to that.
Right, so yes, in 2016, we did a leak survey of our system, identified a number of leaks. It saved us a significant amount of money. This year, in completing our water audit for 2019, we were at 17% water loss. So it's back up again, and we need to identify where where we're losing that water. We continue to replace meters, and a concern to make sure we're not losing, revenue through inaccurate meters. But the other issue is the distribution system and identifying leaks that, may be hidden we haven't identified yet. So that's the reason for the survey. The cost is a per mile basis. We have roughly 100 miles of water main. The quote is for 75 miles, but the 100 miles would bring it to the 19.5.
1.4 million.
Any questions? Thanks, Dan. I appreciate it. I appreciate the explanation on that.
And then I just have a quick update. I know we talked at the last meeting, at a budget meeting, about sewer rates, and that we would be looking at bringing materials for you to talk about this spring, this next month or so. We're working on it in finance. We've been looking at the history and the rates. We need to work a little bit more with Mike about some of the I&I stuff. He's looking into that and the cost. We're hoping by the next committee meeting that we'll have that discussion as well. It may be one more after that, but we're shooting for this next committee meeting.
Very good.
And that's all I have.
That's it. Building and Health, Trustee Zelinski.
No report this evening.
Human Resource and Insurance, Trustee Murphy.
No report, Mayor.
All right. Special Committee Reports, Economic Development, Trustee Navasparza.
Just wanted to give a thank you to the Alsip Chamber of Commerce for distributing census-related materials at their Community Expo. And we do have Alsip Complete Count Committee meeting that's scheduled for this Wednesday at 6 p.m. Here in the Village Boardroom.
I forgot to put on here tonight, too, trustees, was the redevelopment agreement for Firewater. And Kent and I, we talked earlier, and I got stuck in a meeting this afternoon because you and I are supposed to meet. I was out in Hazel Crest. Let's talk again tomorrow, and I want to get all these numbers back over the trustees and to confirm that, it's a good redevelopment agreement.
Yeah, again, we have, with the previous consultant who still does some consulting with us, looked at the numbers. What they presented was absolutely in line with that. So I think everything's where it's supposed to be from an outside third party, from the attorney, et cetera. It hasn't been turned into a full redevelopment agreement yet. But those numbers that was submitted as that proposal completely fell in line exactly where we expected it to.
Our attorney, Joe Kankar, has been overseeing this as well.
So he still has some more work once the board wants to head that direction, but everything fell in line where we thought it would go.
What we originally proposed. All right. Anything else, trustee? Okay, thanks. Village Properties, Trustee McGlowan.
Okay, Roger wants to go out to bid for a whole bunch of stuff here. First one would be for a 3-year contract for lawn care for the Village Hall, Heritage 1 and 2, the boat launch, Firehouse 1 and 2, Pump Station, and Veterans Parkway. Now, these would all be submitted as individual line items within the bid, and we would not have to accept them all if we don't like a certain line item.
That's the way that I structured it the last time.
Okay. Next is a request to go out to bid for the replacement of the common area carpet at Heritage 1 and Heritage 2. Next, request to go out to bid for the replacement of patio doors at Heritage 1. And finally, request to go out to bid for the replacement of 15 window well ingress and egress at Heritage 2. And just because we're going out to bid does not mean we have to accept any of these. We don't like the budget figures.
And I have a follow-up that works perfectly here that Trustee Dezell mentioned earlier. In the procurement, we're going back to the emergency stuff. It reads, emergency procurements provided the same or approved by the vote of 3/4 of all trustees then holding office. So it can not follow all of this if it truly is emergency, as long as 5 of the 6 of you agree that there's an emergency over there. He is still going to try to get the 3. You guys also said the dollar amount that it was not to exceed, but just to let you know, as long as 5 of the 6 agree it's an emergency, if he couldn't get a third one, you guys could, it could still go forward.
Why don't we do this then? Why don't we,
Do it now.
Clerk Winship, just poll everybody real quick for the record, and we'll move forward with that. It's at $30,000, not to exceed $30,000.
And he'll try to get a third one, but if he doesn't do it, he can still move forward with it based on his 2 bids.
And this is for repair of the police department.
Ejector pumps.
Okay, this would be roll call number 1 to approve of going forward with a bid that would not exceed $30,000 for...
It's not a bid. It's not a full vote. What
Just
you're
a
doing is
consensus,
poll.
yeah.
Correct.
Consensus poll.
I'm sorry, consensus poll for a proposal not to exceed $30,000 for repair to the police department ejector pumps. Trustee Dalzell.
Didn't we already say yes to this?
You did,
I just
but you
wanted it for
didn't
the
do it by
record.
poll. The emergency thing said you had to have 3/4, which means 5 of you.
Thank you. Yes.
Trustee Zelinski.
Yes.
Trustee Juarez.
Yes.
Trustee McLaughlin.
Yes.
Trustee Murphy.
Yes.
Trustee Navis Barza.
Yes.
Very good. Okay, Raj, let's
Okay, go to pumps already.
let's talk about that in the morning. Which one you want to qualify, and we'll get going with that.
Return
okay?
that porta potty.
All right. Go ahead, Trustee.
That is all I have under village properties.
Roger, do me one favor, too. I know when we get these bids for lawn cutting, which I can appreciate the fact that our previous person, Quattrocki, he's held the same price for the last 6 years or better. Is there a breakout for each location? Do they actually demonstrate? Can you send me the breakout then for, like, we talked about last week about, like, the... Yeah, but, you know, like, say, for instance, typical personnel can't do the boat launch because of the pitch to the land and all that kind of thing, but I would like to just see a quick breakout for, like,
The fire station.
I don't care, like, we do have some in-house grass cutting here and stuff, and too, even with the summer people, but I'd like to see what the breakout is for the 2 firehouses and the pump station and the Veteran Parkway. If we can maintain that ourselves, do we save any money? I want to see what that looks like real quick, okay? Thanks. Okay. Next, ordinance legislation, Trustee Zelinski.
No report.
IT, Trustee Dalzell.
No report, Mayor.
Okay. Plan and zoning and license, Trustee Juarez.
I have a presentation of a list of licenses dated January 27, 2020 through February 21st, 2020. And I also have a notice of public hearing. A notice is hereby given. The Planning Commission will hold a public hearing for case number 2020-03-S-100 on Wednesday, March 18th, 2020 at 7:30 p.m. at the Village of Alsip Council Chambers, 4500 West 123rd Street, Alsip, Illinois 60803. The Village of Alsip Plan Commission will be hearing an application number 2020-03-S-100, special use to conduct truck repair and park store trucks 11659 through 11701, South Mayfield, Alsip, Illinois 60803. Parties wishing to be heard will be given the opportunity to do so. Sincerely, Stanley, Chairman, Alsip Plan Commission.
That's it?
Yes.
Okay. Trustees, does anyone have any presentations, petitions, or communications?
I did. Early voting is in March, right? Next week?
Yes.
Yes. And I didn't see it updated info on our website of the times and dates unless I missed it. When will that be posted on the website for?
It'll be done before the end of the week.
Okay, thank you.
Also, I was going to let everybody know I'm going to work on a, as we do every year, I like the idea of promoting a student government night. I'm going to set that up for maybe late next month. I don't want to get too close to the end of the school season and stuff, but I'm going to work with Becky Smith, and we're going to do a student government night again. I always enjoy doing that with the kids. Anyone have any unfinished business? Any new business? Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. We'll adjourn this meeting at 9:53, and I appreciate everybody's patience tonight. That was a long presentation, but might benefit the village well at the same time. So have a great evening. Thank you.